I think I'm gonna win.
Hey, I got you with my photon torpedoes.
Yeah. German Mitsubishi.
I hit your gravity drive. You're dead. You're out.
I'm out.
You're out. Uh-oh. Looks like we're on the podcast.
I know.
All right. Well, we better do the podcast now. We'll be right back. Hello, everyone. I'm Matthew Hines for Encounters USA. We are your one-stop podcast and YouTube channel for all things alien, Bigfoot, and Dogman. So relax, kick up your feet, grab one of your favorite beverages, and enjoy the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Encounters USA. Sitting next to me, I have Steve Leumbruno, who's going to be talking to us today about triangle UFOs, the secret space program, and a whole bunch of really cool stuff. So I hope you're going to enjoy this podcast, and as you can see, we are sitting outside. I want to point this out because I've done these kind of interviews before and people complain, why don't you look at your guest? Well, because I have one camera going and one microphone. So if it makes you happy, I'll look at Steve from time to time. But other than that, I'm just going to try to entertain you, my cherished listener. All right then. So Steve Leumbruno, welcome to Encounters USA.
Thank you, Matt.
So, Steve, you were on my show, I think, a little over a year ago before the outbreak, and a lot of stuff has changed since then, not only as far as the outbreak, but as far as the UFO community. If you have not seen Steve's first podcast, I will put a link, it'll be in the description, but Steve, I'm just going to let you start talking about this because it is so fascinating. And what we're going to be talking about are these. So, Steve, go ahead. First of all, tell us your background on your interest in the paranormal.
Yeah, my father was in the Air Force, and I found out, just after his career and then later, more recently, that he was involved in some of this high-tech propulsion technology. He got to witness some of it when he was on the Inspector General's team, and he did like over 30 years in the Air Force, and it was shocking to me to find that out. And it really all kind of came out after I had two UFO encounters, and that you can learn more about that in the first interview. And just prior to Matt interviewing me, I was going to do a lecture. I was scheduled to do a lecture in Seattle. And I was actually on a trip when I found out that they had a lockdown here because of the pandemic. And so my lecture got canceled or postponed. And we tried to reschedule it. We were going to do it on Zoom, and I didn't really want to do it on Zoom. And I was hoping that the pandemic would end by June. But apparently, it kept going on. So I finally, through some of other people that knew me, they kind of helped me organize kind of my own lecture that I did at my house, but I only had like 3 people show up because I think everybody was a little scared at that point. This was in August, so even though I didn't really see anything going on, but it turned out really well. I probably should have filmed it or videoed it, recorded it, but I can do it anytime, my second lecture. And we went into it a little bit in the first interview, but I could talk more about it, and it has to do with these triangular UFOs and a whole other era of UFO encounters, which happened in the 19th century, which I wasn't really aware of up until like 2018, when a gentleman named Walter Bosley was doing lectures, I think as early as 2014. In fact, he coined the phrase breakaway civilization, which is kind of a buzzword or buzz phrase in the UFO community now. I think Catherine Austin Fitts and Richard Dolan use it. they've been interviewed on Coast to Coast. But what it really is about is there were a group of Polish nationalists that organized some secret development of new propulsion technology. It wasn't really new, though. It was something that they had discovered from ancient texts and probably even discovery of archaeological digs. And it was kept very secret. And they actually, according to Walter Bosley, in his book Origins, developed this technology here in the United States as far back as the 1850s. This is very bizarre. You can see some of his lectures online. I think there's one, I can't remember the name of it right now. I was going to try to write that down. But yeah, look up Walter Bosley, Breakaway Civilization or Origins. And there was a guy, Peter Menace, that was an engineer, an American engineer. I don't know how they connected with these Polish nationalists. It has a lot of geopolitics was going on back then too. It was just prior to our Civil War. And there's detail about that in his lecture about how the Lincoln administration actually got involved in it, and it was probably our first black UFO budget program. It sounds very bizarre, but the technology is really not that difficult to create. You just have to have a lot of time, very smart people that have an open mind about physics. And this guy Peter Menace did, and he died testing a lot of these new propulsion devices. They look kind of like dirigibles, but they had gyros and gear sets. And this guy Del Shao actually drew pictures of it. He was involved in this group as well, but he wasn't an engineer. And he lived, I think, till the 1920s, and 1880s, I think. And a lot of his books were kept by his family, and they ended up, I think they were just rediscovered in the 1960s in some small museum, I think in New York State, and they ended up throwing them in the garbage. And somebody discovered them, I don't know who, I can't remember the name of the person who discovered them, and started kind of showing them in places. And they kind of look a lot like, I don't know if a lot of people that are listening to this probably never grew up in the 60s, but me and Matt remember the kind of the stylized psychedelic era. And that's what these pictures, they have the color schemes like that. It's almost like somebody saw that and said, oh, let's use that in pop culture, So they're kind of a pop culture icon, a lot of these drawings that Del Shao, Charles Del Shao is the name of the guy, the artist that recorded these different contraptions that they were developed. And there were sightings in the 1850s all the way up to the 1870s, and then again in the 1890s. And there were just larger versions in the 1890s of what was being developed and funded by these Polish nationalists. And the reason why they use the United States, according to Walter Bosley, is to keep it secret, because the United States at that time was a backwater. It was a free country, it was a republic, but it was just a backwater. The population was so low, it wasn't really in the news, so they used it as a staging ground to create this new technology. And I speculatively connect it to a lot of the sightings in the 1950s, 40s and 50s. I think there's a large amount of data showing that, we have been developing this technology, whether it came from outer space directly or not. We have this technology.
Okay.
That's what I want to get across. Yeah.
Okay, so you've touched on quite a few points, and we're going to talk about, first of all, the breakaway civilization, and we're going to go back into this technology that Steve's talking about. But first of all, there's a lot of stuff coming out now, about in Russia, they had this, and a little bit late, I think the time frame was later, like about the late 1800s, that there was this idea that our destiny is in space. And I've seen, I think it's like on Unexplained or something, I saw this. They're trying to dance around like the communists, but the Russians had an idea that our destiny is in space. The Germans, as we all, anybody that's probably watching this knows, the Germans had something with Maria Orsic and the Vril Society. of, oh, our destiny is in space. And now you're telling me that in Poland too, there is the same kind of society, but even earlier.
Yeah, earlier, and that connection is really closely tied to the German nationalists or the Nazis. I mean, it's really closely tied to that because Germany wasn't, at that time in the 1850s, I think there was a push to unify it, and Poland is right next to Germany. I mean, it's just right on it, basically. And the Germans used a lot of the staging in the 20th century. They used Poland because they brought that technology back to Europe. That's what Walter Bosley talks about. Beginning of the 20th century is when a lot of that technology that was staged here was moved to Germany and Poland, and they did that on purpose. They wanted to unify the country, and basically secretly showing very wealthy Germans and Polish, hey, we have this technology, we could take over the world, and they got the money, and that's how probably World War II occurred. And there were other kind of connections to very wealthy aristocratic families here in the U.S. And he goes into more of that in his book Origins, how they funded it. And I should say that the group in the 1850s was called the Sonoran Aero Club.
Is that California, Sonora?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's right outside of San Francisco.
So we're getting to Mount Shasta and that area?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
You can speculate that, why is there so many weird things going on at Shasta, all along the West Coast?
Okay. Well, yeah, my channel is riddled with all kinds of stuff about Mount Shasta. That's very interesting. So did these Polish immigrants come and settle right out in California?
Yeah, they specifically picked that spot because of the calm weather, the low rainfall.
The lack of Cossacks?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And it was cheap, and they knew they could hide things there. According to Walter Bosley, he's done most of the research. Walter Bosley's background is he did work in intelligence. He had a career in the intelligence community and retired, and now he's an author and lecturer.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the technology now. We have heard of sighting in Texas, et cetera, in the late 1800s that have been attributed to UFOs. So are these earthly craft? Are these something that we're making ourselves?
Well, if you ask the witnesses, they knew they were, because some of them got to actually go on them. They would land and they would go in them, and the pilot would show them what was in there, and it was usually this barrel that was rotating a certain speed, and there was this kind of a dropper that would drop liquid onto the spinning barrel. And this was supposedly the heart of the propulsion system. And Peter Menace called it N gas. He called it. It doesn't make any sense to us, but according to Walter Bosley, they got a lot of this ideas of building this from ancient Indian Sanskrit texts, like Mahabharata, Bhagavad Gita, which they don't really know. They're countless of thousands of years old.
Okay. All right, but now you showed me on one of your models of the craft that I will flash here or here on the podcast. In the center of this craft, there is a tank of something, and that tank is what holds the propellant. Is that your N2?
It could be. I think you're speaking of the flux liner.
Yeah.
The flux liner. Yeah, it was supposedly a nuclear powered plasma generating technology.
Okay.
So it might have been more advanced from what Peter Menace were working on with their UFO.
Okay, so let's just differentiate here, because we have one technology. Let me just stop for a second. We are actually filming next to the slough outside of Seattle in Washington, and behind me is the water, and above us are clouds. Imagine clouds in Seattle, but we are just kind of timing it so well. I hope the rain doesn't come, but it is like, what is it, the middle of March? It is freezing here, and my poor guest Steve is just
fine. I
chilled.
love it.
Okay, so as long as you're comfortable, because if you start to freeze or turn blue, I'm gonna have to shut off the camera.
I was prepared.
All right, so on Encounters USA, these podcasts, we research everywhere. If you want to interview, you could be anywhere. So here we are somewhere outside of Seattle, and we're talking about the technology. Bob Lazar had a chunk of U115 or something like that.
I'm in Pentium.
Yeah, and that hadn't even been developed yet. That is a different technology than what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, I think there are many ways to achieve this, what they call electrogravitic type of propulsion. There's many ways to do it. There's semiconductor technology. If you go on YouTube, you can find a lot of people that develop this. You can use high voltage to do this. Use magnetic. There's just so many ways to do this, but it is something that occurs in nature. A lot of biologists notice that bees and some small birds use this static energy that is kind of omnipresent. You can tap into it. And it's not anything new. It's just new to people that don't know the history.
Okay. Let me, we can go into a long, drawn-out explanation of the physics that are going on here, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to spare you. I just want to touch on the fact that what we're talking about is this craft creates its own gravity. And what that means is that if it creates its own gravity, then it can cancel out our gravity. That means it can go up, down, and when you see the movement of these things, it's just because they're floating on waves like the ocean. They're floating on gravitic waves, which weren't even proven, I guess, when Bob Lazar started talking about it. So the trick is, in order to make these things work, is to be able to manipulate gravity. But you need energy to do that. And are you telling me that, like Tesla found, energy within the Earth, the electromagnetism, and he tapped into that? Are you telling me these things can run by tapping into the same electromagnetism?
Exactly.
But do they need their own source of energy?
They do, but the difference between this technology and, let's say, rocket propulsion, which is kind of the accepted way that we launch into space, is that these devices, they do not have mass. They actually reduce as the device develops more electrostatic charge. It actually reduces its own mass, and it doesn't have to carry large amounts of material to burn. Because the Earth itself is like a giant battery, and other planets as well, you can kind of juxtaposition your propulsive force against that. It's like pushing against. It's almost like it's like this. It's like if you were standing on a building and you stepped off, you would drop really fast, right? And that's because of gravity. That's how powerful. Gravity is a weak force, but it's omnipresent. It's everywhere. And so you're basically tapping into it. So when you're falling, your speed picks up. And now if you were to take the Earth and turn it, you would turn and fall the other direction.
Yep, just like that. Because
the Earth itself is energy. It's an energy force.
Right.
And so the very clever people have figured out how to manipulate that electrically, using electrical discharge, which is really the energy of the universe is electricity. We know that. It exists even while we're sitting here. There's electrostatic charge everywhere. It's just that how do you tap into that? And there are clever people that have figured this out, that have experimented, and they've used all kinds of different energy sources. Like semiconductor is one where you cool something down below zero. There's a static charge down there.
Right.
And there's all kind of, you can look on YouTube, there's all kinds of people messing around with that can levitate things at low temperature gradients using certain materials or certain amounts of crystal material that can counter-react in those scenarios, like silicon and other materials that microscopically have can develop static charge. There's I know Russian scientists that discovered that in beetles, that they had their wings had these pyramidal shapes, microscopic pyramidal shapes that could deflect static charge. And so a lot of times when you see beetles flying, I mean, a lot of entomologists have looked at it and says, that doesn't make any sense. That beetle should not be able to fly. Not only is it too heavy for the size wings that it's using, it's not flapping its wings fast enough for it to stay airborne and for it to maneuver. And so this one clever entomologist in Russia started looking at their wings and discovered that they had this ability to tap into static charge that kind of exists. It's kind of like when you notice it more when it's dark in your house and it's a little bit damp and you run across the carpet and you touch something metal and you feel that zap. There's electricity all around us. It's just omnipresent. It's just that, it's a phenomenon to us because we don't interact with it in order to move or to eat, where the smaller organisms do. Yeah. They just intuitively interact with it. Hummingbirds, bees, there's a lot of studies showing that, they have another ability that we just kind of ignored.
Okay, but we're talking about extraterrestrial craft.
Yeah.
Is the same electrostatic electricity in space also?
Oh, yeah, that's the thing. You don't need to once you develop this technology, you don't really have to stay in orbit. You don't have to really use the Earth's gravity once you get outside it. You can actually, these devices, these propulsion systems actually they get more power, as they get away from another source. The reason why they just levitate is because they're coexisting with the Earth's gravitational forces. Once you get outside that, it's like the speed of light is easy. It's just and if I think I mentioned Ed Fouché in the first lecture. He has an incredible lecture that he witnessed this kind of technology. I think in the late '80s, early '90s, that the Air Force was working on, and he said that they had developed craft that could go 0.8 the speed of light at that time, late '80s, early '90s, 0.8 the speed of light. That's how powerful these devices. But I think they're all nuclear powered. You do have to have a large, at least the stuff that's talked about. You have to have, basically massless energy. You have to have a huge amount of.
So I'm not really up on the 0 point energy. Is what you're talking about 0 point?
Yeah, that I'm not quite up to speed on that. I've had engineer friends try to explain that to me, and that is similar to semiconductor, where if you get down to those lower temperature gradients, that's when they first notice that there's this other, frequency or energy down at those levels. I think that's what that is, and that, there are people that Nassim Haramein, who's a physicist, who has said that energy source is really coming from another dimension. It's like energy that's leaking into this dimensional state. That's his viewpoint on it. Okay. And so you have this limitless energy that doesn't exist here, but is useful. We can actually use it, but you have to get into the right frequency to get that energy. You have to get down into those areas, and I'm not sure. I mean, the spectrum of frequencies that we're experiencing, light waves, reflective light waves, those are all frequencies of energy, come from the sun, and they're a spectrum of it. But then most of it is we can't experience. It's beyond our visual acuity. So we think that there's only this amount of energy, but actually that we're experiencing just the small tail end of the flame, of what really exists energy-wise, So, I mean, I'm not a physicist, but that's I kind of trust Nassim Haramein, who's on the leading edge a lot of this. Is his idea. He believes that our universe, this dimensional state, is a universe that's finite, but with infinite potential. Yeah. That's kind of where he thinks. And so he studied black holes and space itself, and knows that it's limitless energy. Yeah. If you just have to know how to tap into it.
Yeah. And just the stuff you're touching on, it's like a limitless podcast.
Yeah.
Because I'm not
It's
because of what you're saying, but because of what is happening right now. And I'll give you an example. So let's take Ed Leedskalnin down at Coral Castle, right? Same thing. He's talking about what did he call it? He called it magnetricity or something like that. He said that gravity is just a part of that.
Yeah.
And everybody just, they didn't believe him, and that doesn't work in physics. And we have our four distinct forces,
Yeah.
and they're not related. And we're going to spend all this time and money looking for them. But Ed found them. But when you start to get into the propulsion of this or this or that,
I've seen this.
Yeah.
Twice.
Steve has seen
I've
these.
actually seen this.
And built by us, right?
I believe so.
Okay.
After I didn't know at first, but after what my dad told me, and my dad saw my first lecture, and he started opening up.
Yeah.
And I know he's probably taking a non-disclosure statement when he retired, but yeah. So that's what made me think, wow, this is bigger than I thought.
Yeah. So to tie it all together, I mean, Ed Leedskalnin said, I know how the pyramids were built.
Yeah.
And he built Coral Castle. And it looks like what we're coming up upon is that it's all the same technology. You can move big rocks with that stuff, or you can move these things and make them so they just float. And I'll just throw at, if you haven't seen the 500 documentaries on Ed, that these kids said they saw him floating these multi-ton rocks like hydrogen balloons.
Yeah.
So,
There's
what
ways,
is it?
There's
What is
ways
it?
to cancel out gravitational force. There's ways to do it. I don't know how to do it, but I've seen it.
Okay.
I'm totally convinced that it exists because, I've had those videos analyzed and everybody's scratching their head.
Yeah. So, okay, what videos? I mean, the Tic Tac things, or
No, the one that my ex-girlfriend took down in Edmonds.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I have done so many interviews now. Now it's all coming back to me. So yeah. All right. So let's go. This is a nice background on where we are right now, and puts us to the present. So we've had a lot of revelations about since we've talked. They had the Tic Tac UFO thing come out. That Alzado, I can't remember his name, for the Air Force or whatever, said, yeah, they're definitely foreign technology or extraterrestrial, not earthly technology. So, okay, first of all, just to finish up the technology, there's more than one method of moving these things, right? And we know them.
Yeah, there's different.
We're not tied down to a plasma or 115 or we're on all kinds of stuff.
I've seen his interviews, and that's where it's suspect because he's saying that we've never experienced this before. But if you look back in the history, yeah, we have. The Air Force has actually encountered these things and shot, basically had battles with these things. There's documented evidence of it. There's witnesses by astronauts. So it's, for him to say that this is something new. I know in the 60s there was a police officer in New Mexico that saw one of these Tic Tac things. He saw it land.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's new. Maybe it's new to him.
Yeah.
But if you really study the ufology, it's not new. So, but a lot of the people like George Knapp, and they're saying, "Oh yeah, this is disclosure and this is real." I have to be careful. By just assuming right away that it's this is the government coming straight with us, especially since all that's gone on in the last year, governments tend to not tell the people the truth.
No. Where did you get that?
I mean, that's just reality. Unfortunately, it's not good news, but if you're going to get into this subject, you're going to have to encounter a lot of very negative aspects of our human history.
Yeah.
People get greedy, and people can see a future that they think is going to be brighter for the masses, but in reality, men really don't know. That I believe there is a God, and I believe that when men try to like Icarus, you're going to get burned every time. You know, we're not masters of our domain in the least. You know?
Yeah, well, well, that's a philosophical question.
Yeah.
You know, right now, I think that we're going to take just a little bit of a break here because things are changing, the light's changing, the sound is changing, and I just want to make sure that you're getting the best sound and picture possible. So we'll stop for a second and we'll come right back. Hey everybody, as you're watching this podcast, you might have noticed that, yeah, these are some really interesting little UFO models, and these are actually for sale. I'll put these on my website. According to Steve, they're about $60. These were all 3D printed. This is your triangle UFO, and this is your kind of sport model UFO, and then this is what we have been talking about. Inside, you see what is the end plasma generator thing inside there, and it's much better when I show you the picture, but this is it. And these are all replicas of real known re-engineered craft. So if you would like them, I will list them on my website, and I'll list the prices. They're not cheap. Remember, they're 3D printed. They're about $60. And if you want them, buy them, and I'll have them send them to you, and I'll give the money to Steve and the other people that are making these. But very interesting stuff, eh? And also, check out Encounters USA for our merchandise, and always don't forget my great books. All right, now back to the podcast. All right, this is the second half of this podcast, and if you don't remember, I'm with Mr. Steve Leumbruno, and we are talking about technology, we're talking about a secret space program, and we're talking about the machines, basically, and what Steve termed the breakaway civilization that started this all like 150, almost 200 years ago. So let's start off with where you started, and that is with this breakaway civilization, because we're going to be talking about Mars, Moon, and we need to know who's going there and why. What's the point of a breakaway civilization?
In the past, there have been breakaway civilizations. China, I know they're finding out now that China really explored most of what the New World is, and they kept that secret, and they sold maps to Europeans, and there have been different times in our, what we call all of human recorded history, which probably isn't, but and of course, you know, when the Europeans really started in large numbers coming to the supposed New World here, there was a big disconnect in technology. There was a big schism, you know, and they traded, but they ultimately dominated with that technology, gunpowder, which they got from the Chinese, but they used it on indigenous people around the world to basically take their lands and, you know, force people to subjugate people, to control. And so this is nothing new, you know, this is nothing new. And I don't know if most of the Europeans knew that Columbus was sailing here, you know, and there's evidence to show that there were many other expeditions even before Columbus. So, you know, there's a lot of evidence to show that groups of the Knights Templar actually had communities here. There's evidence to show that the Norse had communities here. I mean, it just goes back. Even the Egyptians, there's evidence that the Egyptians probably even sailed here when they were at the height of their reign. So this is nothing new. There's always been secret operations, you know, that they don't want the community to know about. So this is just, I believe, the latest.
So that's what this is. So let's just jump into what I even brought you here for. And really, let's start off with, I've done 2 podcasts. One is on Mars, what's going on Mars, and I use remote viewing, and I base my hypotheses on what the head of the Israeli defense came out and said about a month and a half ago, if even that long ago, and he said, yeah, the Americans are working with aliens on a secret base on Mars. So yeah, this guy could be a complete nutcase, sure, but when somebody makes an outlandish claim like that, the first thing you do is say, well, yeah, he's probably crazy, but is there anything to it? What's his job? Well, he's the head of the Israeli space program. Is what he's saying possible? And now, I mean, to travel to Mars on a regular basis enough to sustain an operation there, because it's not like you can get water and a McDonald's there. You're going to have to keep going back and forth to get people their toilet paper and their toothpaste. So it's not like you can just drop these guys off and let them go. So there has to be some kind of technology to get back and forth. Steve, you say there is.
Yeah, I believe there is. I've seen it. I've witnessed it. And I think there was a purpose of that for me witnessing and seeing that, is to talk about it. And that's a whole other subject. But I really trust certain eyewitnesses like myself. There's certain people that I really trust. Not all of them, but some of them. And one of them was Travis Walton, because what he experienced was kind of like he ran into humans and also what we call gray aliens on a craft that he was picked up in. And you have to look at Fire in the Sky to find out more about that. But he's done so many lectures over the decades, since the 70s when he had his encounter, and he's never changed his story. I think he's totally somebody who's telling the truth. And that shows me that there is kind of a community. There is probably a space age community out there, and that probably only the highest level of security level individuals around the world know about it and are aware of it and maybe have interaction with it. But whether they're totally alien or not, I don't know is true. I think our history is not well recorded. Human history is not well recorded, and it could be that there probably are many civilizations that came from here that were human, that came from this planet. This may be just another it might be a nursery in a way, this Earth. So, and we may, parts of our civilization in the past have been trustworthy enough to be part of this, space age group. And, I personally think in my lifetime, we probably have already developed bases on the moon and on Mars. And I've seen eyewitness accounts of that, going back to the 60s. And then, of course, when you start looking at the 1950s and the technology that was at their hand at that time, you really start to believe it. You really start to believe it, yeah. I actually have two documents that some journalist, I can't remember the name of the journalist, but I got it through MUFON. It was through the Freedom of Information Act, and it was a 400-page document, 2 sections, that was commissioned by the Eisenhower administration to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And the idea was come up with a plan for the United States in the 1950s to build a base on the moon. That's what Eisenhower commissioned them with, and they did. And it is so detailed. I mean, it goes down to how much the nuts and bolts cost. It was just so detailed. And but they were one-way missions. They were basically going to send automated, they were going to land Saturn 1 and Saturn 2 rockets with all kinds of supplies up on the moon ahead of the astronauts. And it would take months to do this. It would be like 17 sorties just to send enough food, water, equipment. And I've personally seen a documentary called Camp Century. And it was a training documentary that's now you can watch on the internet. It's maybe 30 or 40 minutes long. And it shows how they, in the 1950s, built this base on the Greenland ice sheet. And the cover story was, well, we're going to set up an astronomical center there to observe the stars. And then later they changed it to, oh yeah, we were spying on the Russians. That's what we were really the purpose there. But they not only built a base there, they installed a nuclear power plant there that could run for a century. And I recently watched National Geographic, because they abandoned that base, I think, in the 70s or 80s. And that nuclear power plant's still there. It's deep into the ice sheet now, and they're trying to figure out how to get it out. So, but when I'd seen that documentary, Camp Century, probably a couple years before I got the document, called Project Horizon, about the Eisenhower Commission to put a base on the moon. And I'm not kidding you. It is identical. It is identical. The structure they built on the Greenland ice sheet was the exact same structure that they were commissioned to build on the moon. And it looks like a Quonset hut type of design, built into the lunar surface. When I compared the two and connected that, and that's part of my lecture too. I show all these connections between sightings and what really exists, and what, and that's one of them. I was just beside myself. I said, we've probably done this. We kept it secret, and Apollo was probably a cover. It was probably to explain to the public, this is where we really are, when in fact we were way ahead of that. And I've talked to many engineers that tell me that have done black ops projects. They say, well, yeah, whatever you see in the white world, they've probably already done 10 years before, perfected it, and are onto something else. And there's so much evidence for that out there. I mean,
all right. Well, let's. We've touched on so many things. So, when you talk about a breakaway civilization, then, I mean, literally, you're talking about people who break away, right? For whatever reason. Sometimes those people stay in touch with the founding, whoever sent them, and sometimes they don't. What about in the U.S. government? Let's just go into the Tic Tac UFO, because I think we know when there's a bunch of things that are just not right about the Nimitz aircraft sighting of 2004. Number one is that they stayed out there, they watched these things for 4 days with a multi-billion-dollar task force and did not investigate. According to what they said, that is dereliction of duty in my book. They're responsible for a lot of taxpayer equipment. And what is that noise? We've got something coming by it behind us, so we're gonna have to wait a little bit. That is a lovely sound. Yeah, it's not easy doing these podcasts out in public areas, I'll tell you that. I wanted to go about 20 miles away, and we would have had a beautiful, quiet setting, but yeah, this isn't too bad. All right, so breakaway civilization. The Tic Tac UFO, Nimitz, United States Navy. Well, is the United States Navy the only one doing the UFO thing? How many agencies are building these craft, right? And how many of them don't tell the Navy we've got craft out there? And the only reason I'm saying this is because after watching that, there's a guy who came on YouTube and said they have patents for these things. They have patents for the technology. It's a Tic Tac UFO. And so then you have, I want to say Alzado. It's probably not his name. But anyway, the guy from the Air Force that was in charge of the investigations coming out and saying, oh yeah, and we want you to report these. Are we reporting them? And this is my point. Because they are alien, or because they are from another country, or they're another government agency that has become a breakaway civilization.
Well, if you speak to George Knapp, and I went to the 2018 McMinnville conference, and I got to I hung out with them. George Knapp, who does a radio show. I think it's Coast to Coast on Fridays or something. And he believes that they are alien. He told me that there's another video that they still haven't released of this giant disc that's like probably 10 football field size, just under the water, under the Nimitz. Wow. It's in the water. And then somebody got a video of that was on the Nimitz, looking down at this giant circular. That's what he told me. He said they're going to release it eventually. That's what he told me. But that was back in 2018. I still haven't seen it.
Okay. So that wouldn't probably be ours. But
yeah, I mean, I'd be surprised. But then again, what I saw, I don't know. It depends on who you ask.
Yeah, and then, maybe it's a government agency working with these guys.
I mean, this is like the 1960s.
Yeah.
And they had a 300-foot size one. That's the largest one they supposedly have. And then in the 1990s, supposedly, if you believe Ed Fouché, they had a 600-foot triangle. That was in the early 1990s. That was functional. So who knows? I mean, how far do you think they'll you're willing to go.
Well, can I see that for a second? I'm gonna wrap this up because we got some lawnmower over there. Steve, I know, is probably not really comfortable. I have a rock I'm going to have surgically removed from my rear end once this is over, but it's all for you. So I just want to go into this very quickly, and also it's going to be a good chance to plug this. As I said, we're going to put these on my website to sell them, but in my book, Deceptions of the Ages, I talk about extraterrestrial technology and how this works. And this is what Steve was talking about at the beginning. The Vimana technology that the Polish space program and the Germans and everybody else, the Vimana technology talked about spinning Mercury. And in my book, I go into explicit detail based on a guy called Alien Scientist on YouTube. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he does these really good explanations about how this Mercury has metal in it, and you get it going like really, really fast, and then it creates that magnetism that, you know, reverses the Earth's magnetism. So another way to get us off of the Earth, and another way for us to have you know, what they call 0 point or free technology. Well, Steve, it's once again been a fascinating interview with you.
Appreciate it, Matt.
Yeah, I really appreciate Steve coming on and sitting out here in the wilds of outside Seattle. And I appreciate you guys joining the podcast. I appreciate you guys subscribing and supporting me through all of this. We've got some great stuff coming up. I'm not going to tell you now, but we have some really interesting activities going on, and we're going to be doing some really interesting research. And of course, we're going to be keeping Steve Leumbruno on the tether, I guess, so he can keep us posted on these new developments in the secret space program. But as you can see, the closer, the more time goes on, the more we're tying this stuff together. Aliens, pyramids, UFOs, Mars, it all seems to be related somehow. And on Encounters USA, we're trying to figure it out. And I think we're doing it. All right then. So, with Steve Leumbruno, somewhere outside Seattle, I want to tell you guys watching Encounters USA or listening on the podcast, if you're out with Steve or in the woods in general, always watch your back. Matthew Hines here. Just want to remind you, if you like this kind of content, subscribe to this channel, whether you're listening on podcast or watching on YouTube. Also, go to encountersusa.com for more videos and podcasts, all archived for your convenience. Also, we have a wonderful Encounters USA blog, as well as an Encounters USA paranormal shop for all of your paranormal apparel. So, not only can you watch your back, you can put some of our designs on yours as well. So we'll see you on down the road on Encounters USA.